Why didn't you just leave?
Maybe it's just me. The worst of it is they'll turn it back on you, that there's something wrong with you for even thinking that there might be something wrong with the man of God, right, in their life. And I was the worship leader. I couldn't listen to any worship music. Forgiveness and trust are two separate things. Kind of that crazy making where you think that you must be the one who's wrong because no one else is saying anything.
There's a working definition of abuse that we can't stop thinking about. Abuse is when someone breaks into your personal space uninvited and takes something that was never theirs to take. It could be your voice, your will, your sense of who you are. Spiritual abuse, however, it does all of that with one very terrible addition. It does it all in the name of God, and it says, do what I say or God will be unhappy with you, displeased with you.
And if you've ever lived under that feeling, you know that the cruelest part isn't even what was taken, but oftentimes it's what got left behind. It's that voice in your head that's saying, was it me? Was I the problem? Or the panic that you feel in the church parking lot or the church lobby or the Bible on your nightstand that you haven't been able to pick up. And the quiet fear that maybe the God they described is the God who actually exists.
Today's guest wrote the definition I just read you, and he didn't learn it in seminary. He spent years inside a toxic faith community. And when he finally walked out, he lost every friend he had. He nearly lost some parts of his faith with him. He spent years wanting nothing to do with that and not even being able to go in, and not because he didn't want to, but because there was something that he just had to confront first. But then he did the last thing anyone expected. He planted a church. He pastored it for 18 years. And for over 2 decades, he sat with people in an addiction treatment center, people whose trust in everything had been broken, and learning how trust actually gets rebuilt.
His name is Remy Diederich. His book, Broken Trust, has been called by survivors and counselors the clearest, most practical guide to identifying and recovering from toxic faith and spiritual abuse ever written. Remy, welcome to Shepherd's Heart.
Hey, it's fun to be here. I'm glad to meet you too, and looking forward to our conversation.
Yes, me too. Remy, here is kind of what I find very remarkable about your story, and you convey this in your book, Broken Trust. It's not that you just got hurt. It's kind of what you did after all of that, what you did next. And most people, in our experience, what we've seen, when they go through something where they're wounded, they're hurt by church leadership, a lot of them leave, and some never darken the doors of church again. And in your process of all of this, you ended up planting a church, pastoring a church. Can you take us kind of inside though those years where you were struggling? Kind of give us an idea of what you were wrestling through, and ultimately what kind of led you there. Because I know a lot of people would just be like, "Burn it down, we're done," and that doesn't.
Sure.
That's not where you landed. So
yeah, well, I was struggling at first, just having gone through an abusive church situation. We did something radical. My wife and I were living in Minneapolis at the time, like I am now, but we bought a farm in Wisconsin, a dairy farm.
Wow.
With these 2 other families. And we just said, I think we're just going to live out our faith. We're just going to love one another and, meet together, the 3 couples on Sunday or whenever, and invite people to join us. And I think in our mind, we were going to have this bucolic, pastoral vision, relaxed farming together, and then inviting people on Sundays. And we'd have this kind of an organic church experience that, sounded very ideal. The reality of that was we got into it and we just worked all the time. We barely even saw each other, let alone inviting others to be a part of us. So that was a huge struggle for us. I mean, we had given up on church. We didn't give up on God, but we gave up on traditional church, thinking that we could create something of our own that was more organic and natural and Jesus-centered, and it didn't work. I think a lot of people can relate to that. So that was the initial struggle. Financially, we were stuck. It was not a profitable situation. Like I said, we didn't see each other, let alone people off the farm. So I had felt called into ministry years before that, and so I thought, Lord, what am I doing? I don't know where this is going, but I thought this was an answer coming to this farm. And now I feel like we're just trapped. So that was that was the initial struggle.
You mentioned in the book that from the point when the really spiritually abusive situation happened, there was about a 5-year period of time where you didn't walk into a church again, or a traditional church as we know it.
Yeah.
What was your faith like in that time? You mentioned you kind of gave up on church, but you didn't give up on God. But I know there was a period in the book where you couldn't really pray, you couldn't really read your Bible, and so I'd love to hear the thought process between you and the Lord, and just what was going on in your heart and mind in that season.
Yeah, it was a real time of disillusionment, and it was surprising to me. So we would, about every 6 months, my wife and I would try to go back to church, and we'd go there, and everything sounded like a cliche. The music, the songs sounded cliche, the sermon sounded cliche, and we just thought, we can't do this. This isn't making sense. We don't feel like this is drawing us close to God, and we don't feel like God wants us to be. He doesn't want us to go here just out of obligation. So we kept leaving church, over a period of years, and finally, when we moved to the farm, we just quit going to church altogether.
You described it in the book, and I really connected with it because you mentioned, I believe, that it had been very performative in the context that you experienced it before. So you almost needed to break that pattern. And I think a lot of people are feeling the same way.
Yeah, in fact, I just read something. I can't remember if it was on my website or what. Someone was talking about how they felt guilty because they couldn't pray anymore, and they wondered. And I thought, oh, exactly, because I came to that place where even the Bible was cliche. I mean, I'd read it and just I can't do this, and I talked to God about it in the sense that, God, I'm in the wilderness. I think I'm just in a season that for whatever reason you've brought me into, and I know you love me, and you know my heart. I'm for you. I'm certainly not against you, but I'm not feeling this. I'm not feeling prayer. I'm not feeling church. I'm not feeling nothing, and I'm just going to accept that it's a wilderness experience that you're going to bring me out of someday. And I don't know why I had the faith to believe that, but I did. So I really didn't worry about it. Probably 5 years into it, I started, and kind of like going to church every once in a while. I'd pick up the Bible every once in a while to see if it brought me any life. And one time when we were on the farm, I picked up the Bible and I started reading about the life of Abraham. And for whatever reason, it was like God flipped a switch, and that story came alive to me. And it's been a part of my life in a very powerful way. But just that whole idea of Abraham out by himself, no church, he didn't have a Bible, he didn't have a pastor. It was just him and God. And he went through some hard things, but God promised him that he would be a blessing to the nations. And I thought, wow, can that be true? Could that be true for me too, that God might bring me out of this into something where I could be a blessing to other people? So many people feel guilty for leaving church. They feel guilty for not praying, for not reading their Bible. And I'm just always trying to say, hey, give yourself permission to let go of all that stuff. Because I think, at least in my situation, I felt God was saying, Remy, you're too performance oriented. You are way more interested in performing for me than I am. So I want you to, I'm going to put you in a place where you can't even do it, right? That I'm not even going to let you get anything out of it. So you'll drop all those things and just be Remy. And I want to show you that I still love you. And, it took 5 years, but I finally went, okay. And it really set me free. It's ever since that time, it's been, a couple of decades now.
It's amazing. I met with a friend this last week, and she said something that I remembered broken trust, and I sent her the book, and I was like, you have to read this, because she said she went through something so painful, and her prayer was, Lord, I'm not going to walk away from you, but I need to let you go, and please hold on to me as tight as you can. And that sentiment was like, you still have the faith deep down that it's true and he's real, but you need to just let it go in the sense that you knew it before, so that something new can come alive. We hear from people this version of, my church isn't necessarily a cult and my pastor isn't a monster, that, but something feels off, and I feel crazy for even saying that out loud. In Broken Trust, you lay out a spectrum of bad faith experiences, from simple like insensitivity, I think was the first one that you mentioned, which I really connected with, to toxic performance-based teaching, to outright spiritual abuse, and then all the way to mind control. Can you walk us through that spectrum, and where is the line where a flawed church becomes a dangerous one? And how does someone in the fog of that figure out where their church actually sits in that spectrum?
Yeah, well, that's a big question, and I think from you hit all four of those areas well, and I think it fluctuates, and I think that's what makes it somewhat complicated to know, because at some points it can be abusive, and then maybe for a while there is no abuse, but something still feels off, and so you're always doubting yourself, and then sometimes you aren't even aware of maybe some mind control that's taking place until someone speaks into your life and says, "Hey, what are you doing? What it seems like whatever that church or whatever that person says, you just automatically do. Are you, have you compromised? Have you sold yourself out, or do you think that they're the voice of God?" So it's very conflicting. And at the other extreme, I think we have to give grace to people who are just, let's say the leader just had a bad day. It doesn't mean that they're an abusive person. It doesn't mean they're a toxic person even. It just means they had a bad day and they miscommunicated and they feel bad about it. I mean, I know that I wasn't a perfect pastor. And I'd hate for people to run around talking about me being as a toxic pastor in a toxic church just because I didn't interact with them well that day, or maybe consistently. Maybe I didn't have the maturity level at that time, which I'm sure was true for many years. And I wasn't, just wasn't as good of a person as I could have been. That doesn't mean I'm abusive. It is touchy. And I think probably there are some people that misuse the term spiritual abuse, that accuse people of being abusive when they're not. They're just not being a nice guy that day.
I know something for me, and we talk about this on the show a bit, is like the idea of discernment, and really like the biblical type of discernment, being able to distinguish truth and know what's right. And I know a lot of people will say, because I've been in this situation where it was like year one, there were things that I saw and maybe I explained them away. And I just was like overly discerning your own discernment is what I call it. Like you're going, okay, but they seem nice. I don't think that they meant anything. I don't know, that there was any ill will or something in that. And then in hindsight, you go, oh yeah, that probably was what it was. I just didn't say anything. And I know for me, like that makes me feel bad. I'm like, oh, how did I miss this? How did I not know? What would you say is kind of a few of the earliest tells that are a little more obvious maybe, but that people might just sort of dismiss or quench a little bit and go, nah, it's not that. And why do we do that anyway?
This reminds me of a church that I worked with years ago. Actually, it was the main church that I talked about in my book. So I knew one of the elders. I didn't know him real well. I wouldn't consider him a friend, but he was an acquaintance. He was someone who was a part of my church plant in the very beginning. And so he was an elder at this church when the pastor just went totally off the rails. And he had been a Christian for a long time, elder in the church for a long time. And I said, you got to help me out here. How could you let this happen? I mean, this wasn't just a small divergence. This guy was into real theological error and some pretty sick stuff. And he said, in the early days, I thought I was going to say something, but as I looked around, no one else was saying anything about it. And I thought, well, maybe it's just me. And I think that's so true. It's kind of like what you're referring to, Alycia, the kind of that crazy making where you think that you must be the one who's wrong because no one else is saying anything. So I think that's something to be aware of. So some of the signs are, I guess, just if it keeps happening, if you keep saying these things. And I think you have to be careful. Well, I was going to say you have to be careful to what other people are saying. If you hear other people always making an excuse, like that's a tell. It's like, well, yeah, but you said that last time and it hasn't changed. Another thing is just where the leader is drawing attention consistently to themselves, and they always have a justification for why it is that they did what they did. And I think that's part of the crazy making, because you go into your office to confront them about what it is that you feel concerned about, and they'll have this, either they'll have an excuse for it, or they'll somehow defer or distract you to some other topic. Or the worst of it is they'll turn it back on you, that there's something wrong with you for even thinking that there might be something wrong with the man of God, right, in their life. So there's just so many little things, and I think it's important to respect yourself. Like, the Spirit of God is in you. The Spirit of God wants to show you when someone is misleading you. And so when you have that check, that feeling like, wait, something's not right here, I would say follow that lead. Follow that lead. Maybe talk to someone about that, or read about that, or do something about that, but just don't drift with it thinking that, well, maybe it's just me. Because I would say it's probably not just you, and there's something behind your feeling.
There's a pattern I know that you described in the book that for me, it made kind of me go, oh yeah. I think people listening might go, their jaws just drop open, because it might be the first time anyone's like named this exact experience. You've written that people, they finally kind of work up the courage to bring up a legitimate concern to a toxic leader, let's say, or someone who maybe it's not even, they don't know they're toxic yet, but somewhere in that meeting, like you said, the whole thing just flips. They walk in and they have like a grievance, and then they walk out, and they're the ones asking, oh, please forgive me for my observations or something. Can you explain a little further, like the mechanics? How does that work? How do they turn I disagree with you into like, you have a rebellious spirit, or you have a Jezebel spirit, or something like that is the popular trend these days?
Well, they're really in a power position in many ways. I mean, they have a power position in their education, if they have an education. They don't always have the education that you wish they did. But let's say they do. Let's say they have a master's degree in theology, so they can outquote you in the Bible. They have the position of pastor, and they can just say, hey, I've been ordained by the church or the denomination for this position. So they've got that power role. I mean, the power position of having an office, and they're sitting behind a desk. I mean, there's so many things stacked against you when you walk into a pastor's office as far as the power differential. And so many of us, unless we're really self-confident, we're going to walk in feeling intimidated and I don't know if I should be doing this. I might be wrong. And so you see, you're setting yourself up just by your own attitude, and they can take advantage of that by intimidating you.
Something that you said about it too in the book was like, sincere believers often become the most susceptible to it, because like you're going to be more honest. Like you said, you're not sure, you're a little fearful about what you're doing. Sometimes it will be reframed as like your fearfulness or even your shame of like, oh my goodness, when they flip it on you is evidence of their innocence and your guilt.
The believer's humility can work against them, because they want to respect authority. They want to respect their pastor. And when that pastor applies any pressure to you to change your mind, it's like, oh, you're right. I'm sorry. So and if you do have your own shame issues, when you don't think that much of yourself, again, that's playing against you.
Remy, a question that we've seen before, which, because we all know hindsight is 2020. So sometimes when someone is experiencing that dynamic that you just explained, the question from people on the outside to people who, or maybe even the question we ask ourselves is, why didn't we just leave? Why didn't you just leave? In the book, Broken Trust, your book, Broken Trust, you describe it almost like a mortgage payment situation. And I had never heard that explained like that before. So could you unpack that for us a little bit? I believe that you called it an equity investment. So what would an equity investment look like for someone who is maybe stuck in that dynamic and hasn't left yet?
Yeah. Well, just to I don't know who to give credit to, but I had heard that idea of an equity investment, and I don't know if they were applying it to a church situation, or I just picked up on the comparison. But the idea of an equity investment, it is like a mortgage, is where you're paying monthly into something, you're investing in something over a period of time. And the longer you're paying into something, the less you want to get rid of it because you're so highly invested. And that's exactly what happens in any kind of relationship, and certainly in a church relationship, that you're spending your time in that church, you're spending your money in that church, and over time you develop friendships, and maybe your family are going to that church. So a lot of your life is invested in that church. So the thought of leaving the church is like, oh my gosh, how do I do that? And so this is probably the number one issue that I talk to people about, and they contact me about, because they see the abuse in the church, but they have so much equity investment in the church, and they don't want to leave it because they have so much invested, but they feel bad to stay there. That like they're somehow that they're affirming the authenticity of the pastor when they don't believe that that's true.
It sounds so similar to kind of like that, like a sunk cost fallacy. Like you're like, well,
right.
But I've been here, I'm this far on, and it would just mean starting over. And I've heard that from people too. How can you? Is there anything you can say to somebody who is really wrestling in that, and without just going, yeah, just leave? Because here's what I see. People will go, well, it's just that one area, but the youth group is good, or the children's ministry is awesome, and the kids really love it. And so many times we'll make the decision for what's best for the kids as if those things are not contiguous, as if they don't touch or overlap in any way. As if leadership has no impact on those things. So how would you guide someone in that decision?
Well, it is a tough decision because there are other factors involved. The bigger the church, the more a church might be siloed, and there might be areas of the church that are good and valuable. And I don't think you can legislate to anyone that this is what you should do. It comes back to discernment. What is God calling you to do? So I think one of the things I just boil it down to for people is that you either need to confront what you see is wrong, or you should leave. And if you can't leave for whatever reason, I think it's upon you then to confront what you see. As you confront what you see is abusive or wrong in the church, you're giving them an opportunity to change, or at least explain themselves better than what you currently understand them to be doing. And then maybe that'll give you more reason to leave if they don't handle that properly. It's just really hard. There's so many factors. Like I said, you got your friends, you got your family, you're weighing a lot. For me, I'm more of a black and white person. I'll say, hey, I don't want to affirm bad leadership. I certainly don't want to affirm abuse. So to me, I'm willing to take whatever losses I have to. If that means I'm going to lose friends over this, if I have to separate myself from family, I'm going to do that. But that's me. I'm black and white. I can make those decisions. But I don't want to impose my personality on other people who are not as black and white as I am. And they might just be much more relational than I am. So I can't legislate that. But I would sure hope that they would at least consider how they might be affirming something that's ungodly. And if they can see that with the weight of what it is, maybe that will help them to make the decision to leave.
I know a big part of discernment, at least for me, but I think this is pretty universal, is it's not even that you magically come up with understanding in the moment, but it's more like people who do like self-defense and things like that. And they're aware of things that they've trained for. So it's not a shock if a fight broke out or something like that. They've spent a little more time kind of thinking through, like, what are my non-negotiables? What are the things that if this came up, like if the pastor started denying the Trinity, or if something happened like that, or it became this weird cult with mind control tactics, I'm aware of it. What I find though is most people haven't really given consideration to those things ever. It's not right. There's not a lot of conviction one way or the other. It's like, every church is basically the same. They're all opening the Bible or something. And I want to, though, talk about a part that I think is something that often nobody really validates. And give people permission to kind of feel something about it where maybe there's been shame there before. I know you've said that survivors can often return to church, but can't read their Bible. They can't pray. We talked about this a little bit. Can't hear worship music. Can't feel like there's something alive in them. And I think it's because the very things that were supposed to connect them to God got wired or connected to that abusive stuff that was going on. And so well-meaning Christians will tell them like something like, just get over it, just move on. What's the big deal? What's actually happening in a person when kind of the tools of the faith become like triggers to them?
I think what happens with those situations is in an abusive situation, the songs and the sermons and the counseling, whatever it is that was abusive, something is imprinted on the whole experience. So if you feel that the church is abusive, that abuse gets imprinted on all worship music. And so when you go to another church, it triggers you to remember the other. And so, I think that's why it's important to be willing to take a step away and maybe find a different avenue. There's different ways to worship God. It doesn't have to be in a church on Sunday for an hour or 2 hours or whatever your tradition is. There's other ways. And I think if you can take a step away and ask God to show you, so what are some other ways? I remember when I first left this church that was abusive, and I was the worship leader, I couldn't listen to any worship music.
Mm-hmm.
The only thing at the time, this dates me, but there was a man by the name of John Michael Talbot, and he played instrumentals, and he was the only guy I could listen to. He would like sing the Psalms, and it was just him and his guitar singing the Psalms, and I really enjoyed that. But I couldn't listen to any other kind of worship music, and it was a strange thing. But I just felt, this is the result of the abuse. I'm wounded. And any other music just kind of pulls me right back into the bad experience that I had. So I think when you recognize that's happening, it's not your fault. The fault is from the abuse. So you just need to figure out what's a new avenue. If you can't go down the avenue of what you were doing, then I trust that God has another avenue for you.
I believe this was your illustration, and if it was so good. In the book, did you make a similarity to how if you were in an abusive, like a physically abusive marriage, and you had to walk away, that marriage ended, and you got away from that physical abuse, and then someone likened it to, well, just hurry up and get married again?
Yeah, I talked about that you'd never recommend someone to do that. That would be foolish because you didn't resolve any of the issues from the first bad marriage or the trauma of the abuse that you experienced in that marriage. So to just bounce right into a new relationship and certainly a new marriage, you're really setting yourself up and the other person up for a bad relationship. And I said that's the same thing with the church. You don't just go find another church and assume it's all going to work out and maybe there's even issues within you that need to be addressed about how you relate to a church organization. That
was so good. And it seems like it makes so much sense when you use that analogy, but why in the church world? Because oftentimes in the church world, when someone leaves a church, the advice that they would get from someone who hasn't experienced what they've experienced is, well, you just need to get back in church. You just need to find a new one. You just need to get plugged in. Like, it's really dangerous if you stay outside of the church for too long. Why do we do that? Why is that the advice that we give?
Oh, I think it gets back to that idea of being performance oriented. We feel like we need to perform for God. And if we're not performing for God, that somehow he's displeased with us and bad things are going to happen. That was one of the abusive things that was said at the church that I left is that, if you leave this church, bad things are going to happen. And I thought, you talked about what are some telltale signs. That's a big telltale sign when someone says something like that. But it's surprising how often I hear that go, yeah, that's what my pastor said. They said, if you leave the church, bad things will happen to you. But what does that say about the Holy Spirit in us? Jesus said that his Spirit is in us to lead us, to guide us, to teach us. The church is there to help us, to encourage us, but the Spirit of God is the primary thing inside of us. And Jesus himself said, wherever 2 or 3 are gathered. So if just you and one other person gets together, he's saying, you're good. That's amazing. If you get together with one other believer, I'm there with you. So I just don't understand where we get this whole idea that if you leave church, bad things are going to happen to you.
Remy, I know something you talk about is like you spent decades helping people in addiction recovery, and oftentimes in that circle, they're dealing with issues of broken promises. I won't drink again, or something to that effect. I do feel like that gives you a distinct advantage in how you speak to these types of audiences, because I know the common refrain is like, well, just forgive and forget, just forgive, move on. But they almost use that like a weapon. Can you kind of untangle that, like the forgiveness dynamic there for us a little bit? Does forgiving an abusive leader mean just, oh, well, I just go back and I go back to the church? And what if they have not done anything to change, to apologize or anything to that effect? Are we, in a sense, obligated to somehow be there to go, well, I'm as a show of my forgiveness of you, I must attend your church?
Yeah. And again, comparing this to a marriage, I think that happens a lot. That, let's say the husband has an affair and then he insists that his wife, oh, you got to forgive him. The Bible says forgive. So, we have to get back together, and it's that more crazy making statements. But the issue that a lot of Christians and all people have the wrong understanding is that forgiveness and trust are two separate things. I can forgive you today. I mean, if you punch me in the face, Stewart, I can forgive you right away. I'm not meaning that I'm not going to get back at you, but that doesn't mean I'm going to trust you. I go, whoa, that guy is volatile. I need to keep my distance from him until Stewart rebuilds my trust in some way and lets me know that I can be in his presence and it's now a safe place. But until you can prove to me over a period of time that you've created, that you have changed and being with you is now a safe place, I need to hold you at a distance. That's create a boundary like that. Now, I've forgiven you, but I don't trust you. And those are two totally separate things.
You mentioned in the book, we've talked about it on this show a bit, is like in Ezekiel 34. I think it's one of the best passages on understanding God's heart toward shepherds who don't shepherd, who even abuse their role to fatten themselves, as it says in Ezekiel 34, and how he is the one he's going to come and rescue the flock, kind of a bit of foreshadowing of Christ coming. And then in Galatians, I know it's a bit of maybe the backbone even of your book, Paul kind of torches those who are spiritual manipulators, who are using people to gain authority or to gain some sort of status or something like that. How do we approach that kind of mentality of people who are maybe not seeing it that way? Their eyes are still kind of closed to it, and they're still looking at things and going like, well, it's because they have that title. They have the title of pastor or leader or it's a church. I'm obligated in some sense to just adhere to them. It wouldn't seem that is the heart of God, and you don't see the Apostle Paul really going, oh, as long as they were sincere, just let it go, and they're good. Just move on. It sounds to me like what you're saying is like relationships don't necessarily get reconciled as a guarantee just because you've been like, hey, I hold forgiveness in my heart toward you, but you don't have access to me. God's not neutral on this position. So should we be neutral on this position? Should we approach the things that he has a strong opinion about, that the Word of God has a strong opinion about, loosey-goosey, or should we have more of a, hey, yeah, this is definitely a relationship breaker? How far should we take that?
All relationships are based on trust. And when someone breaks your trust, I mean, that's the whole reason I titled my book Broken Trust, because I think that's the essence of what's happening with any kind of abuse, that your trust is broken. And so when trust is broken, it's really incumbent upon the person who broke it to heal that wound or bridge that gap. I mean, that's just one of the physical pictures that I've drawn for people, that when initially you're together with a person and the one person abuses the other, suddenly now you're separated, you're on two sides of a valley, and the offender has to literally bridge that gap, that wound that took place. And the victim of the abuse, they're the ones who kind of sets the standards. They say, I'm not looking for a shaky string bridge here. I want a full suspension bridge here that I can trust, so when I walk across that bridge, I'm not going to fall through again. And so I think that's fair of the person who's been abused, because like I was referring to before, they don't feel safe, and the offender needs to create a safe place. And unfortunately, it doesn't always happen. In fact, I don't know if rare is the right word, but it doesn't happen enough. I would say that.
For someone who has gone through the process of healing, maybe it took 5 years, 6 years, 8 years to kind of get to that place where they're ready to get back in church. And they are just terrified because their healing took a long time. And in a similar way that when we talked about the sunk cost fallacy, or the mortgage payment illustration that you made, the equity investment, I feel like a lot of us have a lot of equity investment in our healing, in that time period of healing. And now we feel like we are ready to get involved in church again, but there's this feeling of, there were things I didn't catch before. And we're on people would call it hypervigilance. You walk into the doors of the next church and you're like, is that a bad guy? Is that a bad guy? Is that a bad guy? Right. And you're carrying those wounds into the next church. So let's talk to the person who is maybe just getting ready to walk in the doors, or they're wading those waters of starting new with a new church. How does a survivor vet a church before handing over their trust? Give us maybe some green flags, not just the red ones, of what to look for in a new healthy leadership.
Yeah, well, the first thing I'd say is just to go slow, that there's no pressure. I mean, like in my case, I'd been out of church for 5 years. So if I've been out of church for 5 years, that doesn't mean I have to quick rush back in and be a full-time volunteer and be at all the church services. Just go slow. And even before you go back, I would, the internet has done us a favor, and we can explore so much and learn so much about a church before we even enter the doors. So, when I moved to Minneapolis just a few years ago, we had been in Wisconsin for a couple of decades. And so that's what I did. I went online and I started checking out different churches and just looking at the websites and looking at what are the words that they use? Who are the people that they promote on their church? What do they say about them? How do they talk about them? Are they elevating their pastor like he's the greatest thing or she's the greatest thing ever? So I'm very careful to look for different things that are important to me on the website. And then when you finally make it to a church, just sit in the back row if you want to. When a lot of people came to the church that I pastored who had bad church experiences. And when I'd find that out, I'd say, hey, look, just come in late, leave early. Don't sign up for anything. In fact, sometimes people would come to our kind of get to know you luncheon. And I'd say, look, I don't want you to even try to become a member for at least 6 months, because I want you to be sure that this is the place that you feel comfortable. So there's no pressure for you to become a member here. If you do become a member, that's great. If you choose to come and not become a member, that's fine too. It's all good. So one of the things I'd be looking for is just that sense of freedom. In fact, sometimes in my sermons, every once in a while, I just kind of sprinkle in, especially on a hot topic or a topic that I knew was divisive. I'd say, hey, look, this is my opinion. I'm just one guy out of a million, and this is how I perceive what God is saying in the Bible. But if you disagree with me, that's okay. I'm still going to love you even if you don't agree with me. So those are some of the things I would recommend, just to check it out. Go slow, maybe volunteer at a very minimal basis just to see how people volunteer at your church. Are they volunteering out of obligation? Are they having fun doing it? Are there good relationships? Is there resentment and bitterness that people have because they are volunteering? I mean, there's so many things you can look for if you're going slow and if you're being wise. One of the reasons we get abused in the first place, especially if we're a new Christian, is we go to church with this wide open heart, just expecting the best. And again, I can compare this to a love relationship. You find someone and you're impressed with them and you're just wide open and you think this is the best person in the world and they can never do me wrong. And then because you were so wide open and not discerning, you look past some things that you should have seen in the early days. But if you're a new Christian, you go there saying, well, these people, they love Jesus. They love me. What can go wrong? So you look past a lot of things that you probably shouldn't have looked past. But the second time around, you're wiser. I mean, I'm still doing that. I have my checklist going all the time when I go into a church and I'm judging the situation, trying to have some discernment about the quality of the church experience.
In the church that you planted after the harm that you experienced and your time of healing, what were some of the things that you observed in church leadership prior to in the harm that was caused that you took into your church planting experience and said, these are the things I want to do differently. This is how I want to set up this leadership for the success and a healthy church?
The thing that comes to mind is just giving everyone voice. I wanted to give people, the church started out with 20 people, so it was easy to give a lot of voice. But as the church grew and I started gaining staff, I certainly wanted to give the staff voice, but also the church voice when we came to any major decisions. We never did any kind of just, this is the way it is and this is the way it's going to be and suck it up because we're the leaders and you're not. We would always invite the congregation to speak into our decisions. And if they didn't like the decision, we wouldn't do it. We'd just say, well, that's fine. Let's put this on hold. Let's dedicate ourselves to prayer and discernment on this process. And because I always trusted the Holy Spirit, I trusted that if God wanted us to go ahead with something, like we had a big building campaign, and we happened to do it right during the 2008 big recession. And some people said, how can you even consider this? And I said, well, if God wants us to do it, I think the money will come in. And if he doesn't want us to do it, the money won't come in. So I'm totally fine in trying to raise the money. We were always open to what people had to say. And in that situation, the money came in and it was a very successful campaign. Just giving people voice and letting people know that we valued what they had to say and think about everything, and that we were willing to back off if there was pushback. If people weren't comfortable with what we wanted to do. I think so one of the things that's so distasteful to me in a church setting is when there's just, it's my way or the highway. This is what we're doing. I'm the man or woman of God. This is what God spoke to me. This has got to happen. And there's no sense of input. It's like, so what am I, chopped liver? I mean, do we just sit back and let you make all the decisions here? Is that how God works? I hired someone once who kind of had that attitude over his ministry. And I said he had the Moses mentality, that he came down from, the mountain hearing from God and told everyone what to do. And he didn't give anyone in his ministry voice. And I said, that's not acceptable.
Yeah, I know that Moses model is often mimicked, and I think people forget. It's like, hey, you remember when Moses was like, hey, I'm overwhelmed and I can't make any decisions and I need help.
Right.
And his father-in-law is like, you know what you should do? Delegate. It's like, yeah, that would probably be helpful. So, no man is capable of being God in that situation. Before we go, I want to maybe speak to a person who has probably been watching, listening, and maybe they're sitting there with their arms crossed and they're just like, I don't know, I'm kind of done. As far as they're concerned, the pastor who hurt them or the church that hurt them or the system, they represent the God that they preached, and they think they're the same person, and they're just about to walk away from both. I know you've written like that watching people give up on God because of an abusive church, it really breaks our heart. Because, they came looking for life. They came looking for help and hope, and maybe they got handed a fistful of devastation instead. Could you talk to that one person right now, in not the audience, but just that one person who might be watching? What do you know about God after everything, you've been through and you've experienced and you've written about, and you've rebuilt, but maybe they can't see that from where they're standing yet. Could you speak to that person?
Yeah, I think what I'd say to that person is God knows your heart. God knows what's been done to you, and he appreciates it. And if you don't feel like you can go to church, if you don't even feel like you can believe in him right now, he understands that. And I think that's where some people might say, well, that's dangerous. How can you say that? It's like, I just have that much trust in God, that goodness and mercy are going to follow me all the days of my life, and God's never going to let go of me. So to that person, if they might feel that they're letting go of God, but he's not going to let go of them. He's going to pursue them. He's going to continue to show them ways to get to know him. He's going to continue to show them his goodness and woo them back to him. We have to get away from putting so much responsibility on the believer and putting more responsibility on the Spirit of God, trusting the Spirit of God to do his work in our lives.
That's so good. It's so good. I know in Ezekiel 34, when we look at that again, God, he looks at the shepherds who wounded, and he's not making excuses for them. He's not making a defense of them. He even says, I'm against them. Like, that's not okay with me. But then what is so amazing is when he says, I myself, I'll search for my sheep. I will go.
Right.
And he's looking for them. And he's not asking anyone to come back to what hurt you, to what misrepresented him. He's coming after them himself. And that really is the heart of the Good Shepherd. So he's the one, he's laying down his life. He's the one, he's never once been holding the knife there and making the threats.
I just wrote a series of articles on my website about people who leave church, and can you leave church and still be a Christian? And I quoted Ezekiel 34 because it's interesting in there. If you look at it, God says, he lists all the bad things about the shepherds of Israel. And then he says, I will pasture you. I will look after you. And so I guess I'm just tacking on this to what I just said about, you were asking me about the person who's tempted to leave even Jesus. But I appreciate that God says, okay, your pastors have failed you. I'm going to take over. I'm going to do what they couldn't do for you. And that's just really encouraging to me, how personal God is. And that's, a lot of the stories in the Gospels are about Jesus speaking to an individual, not to the masses, but to an individual. And I think we lose sight of how personal God is and how much he loves each individual person and understands them and their situation in their own context. And that's why we can't tell people what you should do this and you should do that, because it's a very personal thing.
Remy, I just want to say thank you for coming on with us.
Sure.
And really, I appreciate you kind of, figuratively speaking here, kind of running back into that burning building after you could have left, and instead you said, no, I know what it's like to be in that, and I want to help people. And I think that's the heart of this show. That's our heart. I know Alycia and I both. So again, thank you for coming on the show. How can people find your books, find more about you? Where do they need to go?
Sure. The best place is just on my website. It's readingremy.com. Reading like reading a book. Reading Remy, my name, REMY.com. And I've got, I list out all my books there. I've got over 300 articles there that talk a lot about this. Also on YouTube, I've got a YouTube channel where I go into a lot of these things. There's one folder that has a lot that address spiritual abuse issues as well. So those are the main things. All my books are available on Amazon.
Wonderful. We'll make sure to get all those links and collaborate with you so that people can easily find you. But right now, I want to talk to you guys listening. I just want you to know that if this episode named something that you've been carrying alone, that you are not alone in this process. There are many others, including us, who are walking through it with you. So there are two things that I'd love for you to do. Number one, go get Remy's book, Broken Trust. It was incredibly instrumental for us, and I think it will be for you as well. And then number two, if you just subscribe to this show and hit the alert button, because we're going to be putting out more content like this, and our hope and desire is that it will be helpful and healing for you. If you need any other resources, please reach out to us so that we can help you, or leave a comment below so that we can pray for you and walk through this with you. But thank you so much for joining this episode of Shepherd's Heart, and we will see you on the next one.
See you guys next time.